I'm Cynthia Rowland, and this is episode 126 of EO Radio Show. In today's episode, I'm joined by David Ogburn, a senior client strategist with BNY Mellon, and he'll talk about the just-released BNY Annual Charitable Gift Report covering 2024. David presents the highlights from the annual report, and he'll share insights, best practices, and actionable strategy recommendations for planned giving success. This episode will be of particular interest to the charity executive leadership and board leadership alike. Listen in. Welcome to the EO Radio Show, your nonprofit legal resource. Brought to you by the Exempt Organizations Group at Farella, Braun & Martel. My name is Cynthia Rowland, and I'm a partner at Farella. I'm a business and tax lawyer with more than 30 years of experience advising clients on nonprofit and charity law. Through this podcast, our lawyers and guests will discuss a range of legal and business issues impacting the nonprofit world because we understand you work hard every day to make your community a better place to live and do business. Many of our programs focus on the basics, and at times we'll do a deep dive into narrow and complicated legal issues. Again, welcome to the EO Radio Show. We're glad you're here. I'm so happy today to be joined by David Ogburn. He is a senior client strategist with BNY Mellon. With more than 25 years of experience in the investment and financial services industry, David brings abundant expertise to his client relationships. David has been with BNY Mellon since 2019. Before that, he was an executive director at JP Morgan Private Bank. And prior to that, he held various business development and investment-related roles at global investment banks. In his role working with philanthropists, with his expertise as a certified financial planner, David sees firsthand the trends in charitable giving by those in a position to be major donors to charities. Thanks for joining me today, David.
Thank you for having me, Cynthia.
So our main topic today is a discussion of the BNY Annual Charitable Gift Report for 2024. But before we get into that, tell us about BNY Mellon. I hear it's got an amazing and long history.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So last year, 2024, the report or the data we're going to talk about actually marked our 240th year in business. So if you're a history buff in any way like I am, you'll like the fact that we are the oldest bank in the U.S. We were founded by Alexander Hamilton. We were also the first stock traded on the New York Stock Exchange, which was founded by Alexander Hamilton. And we managed and administered what's believed to be the first ever trust in the United States, which was for the benefit of Eliza Hamilton and their children. You'll probably recall from American history that infamous duel between Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton, which led to Alexander Hamilton's demise. And while he was the Renaissance man of the time, he wasn't wealthy. So all of his wealthy friends got together and pooled their assets together to support Eliza and their children.
And that was the first trust managed by BNY Mellon and in the U.S. That's amazing. I had no idea.
And then if might be helpful also if I give a little background on our relationship in the nonprofit community with endowments and foundations and our planned giving group, more specifically, as they're the authors of this report. So, philanthropy, I can say, has been a part and parcel to our firm since the beginning. Eliza, if you ever saw that show Hamilton on Broadway, you might recall at the end of the show, Eliza talked about founding an orphanage in honor of Alexander Hamilton. That orphanage still exists today in New York, and we've supported it since the onset and continue to support it today as a firm. So our commitment to the community dates as far back as our firm. We're actually one of the leading advisors to nonprofits globally. In fact, just a quick statistic, we work with 52%, so just over half of the top 100 endowments in the U.S. and 31% of the top 100 foundations. And, we like to say that we sit at the intersection of donors and philanthropists on one side and nonprofits on the other for our family clients, just helping them think about what impact they want to have in the community and how best to implement that. And then for our nonprofit clients, just ensuring that they're stewards, careful stewards of the assets they've been entrusted with by their supporters and making sure that their organizations are in a position where their mission is sustainable.
Well, that sounds great. That's fantastic. That gives us some context for why a charitable gift report would be an integral part of what BNY does. So let's dive right into that. Where does the report data come from, and what kind of stuff are we going to cover today? Let's just dive right in.
Perfect. Well, our plan giving group itself manages over $2.4 billion for over 100 clients. And in fact, this report itself consisted of data from 103 of our clients. Just to tell you a little bit about the report, first and foremost, it's a proprietary report. It's something we publish annually. I like to think of it as being something that's very complementary to the Giving USA data. You might be familiar with this. Many people are familiar with the Giving USA data. That's data that's reported annually by the Lilly School of Philanthropy, Family Philanthropy at Indiana University, in conjunction with the Giving USA Foundation. So whereas that looks at data on what I would say a very macro level or national level, I view this report as being more micro in how it maybe complements that data. Because one, it's specifically data that's collected from our plan giving clients, and it's specific data that looks into how they're and what they're donating to from their CGAs, CRTs, and DAFs. 103 clients, as I mentioned, participated in it. Over half were educational institutions, and then the next most represented were faith-based and social services organizations. And in short, the purpose of the report is to help our clients assess the philanthropic landscape. It goes back 5 years so they can see trends within donor behavior, and then garner what hopefully will be some insights, some context, and even some benchmarking that they can obtain from the report. It's broken down into three broad areas. I think the area we'll spend the most time on is charitable gift annuities, where we're managing large programs for some of these very large nonprofits nationally. Charitable remainder trusts, where some of the data looks similar and despite several differences, and then data which we've gathered or captured through the BNY Charitable Gift Fund, which is a DAF that we use to accommodate our clients. So I'll say there's three things really as a goal for this discussion that we're having. One, to present the data, share some key insights. Two, we provided a composite donor profile based on that data. And then lastly, what's the call to action? What are some strategy recommendations that our nonprofit clients and those listening to this podcast can benefit from?
That's great. So let's jump right into the insights for charitable gift annuities. Do you want to explain for our listeners basically how a charitable gift annuity works and then the data that you've gathered?
Sure. In essence, a charitable gift annuity is a contract between an individual and an institution, a nonprofit institution, whereby in exchange for a donation to the institution, the donor in return receives a stream of income for a lifetime. And then what's remaining, what's called the residuum or remainder benefit within that gift annuity contract, upon that donor's death, becomes a donation to the nonprofit institution. The donor actually gets a twofold benefit. One, they get that lifetime income stream. And two, at the time they make that gift, they get the benefit of a tax deduction. The
estimated actuarial value of the remainder?
Exactly.
Basically. Right.
Exactly.
Gotcha. All right. What do you see in the data? What are the trends there?
Well, the great news is that we've seen the highest level of activity in the last 5 years, back in 2024. I think some of that corresponds with what was a pretty nice backdrop for the stock market, because most often the securities that are used to fund these CGAs are highly appreciated, low basis assets, publicly traded securities like stocks or mutual funds, ETFs. And those did very well last year, as you can imagine. The other good news is that the total gift size increased, as did the average gift size as well. What's remarkable about the data is the average gift size was about $50,000, which makes you wonder why. Why $50,000? And we actually tie that into a provision from the Secure Act, which you might recall back from 2022, enabling donors to make an IRA distribution called a qualified charitable distribution from their IRA, either directly to a nonprofit or for a smaller amount that's indexed to inflation to a charitable remainder trust or charitable gift annuity, CGA. Back then, when it was passed, that amount that you could make a one lifetime distribution to a CGA was $50,000. That's indexed to inflation, as I mentioned. And the amount that you could do that in 2025 is $54,000. So you can see it's right around that $50,000 target, which is, what we think is one of the drivers of that increase in the size of average gifts. The nice thing is, too, that, we broke out data according to different size gifts that we saw through our programs, and gifts over 50,000 made up over 90% of the gifts, both in number and in total dollar volume. And if you refine the range even further, and this is important to our nonprofit clients when they're thinking about marketing strategies for their charitable gift programs, the range was basically 50,000 to 500,000. That seemed to be the sweet spot. Another thing that I think is of note for our clients that came out in this data was about 85% of all the gifts were standard gift annuities versus close to 15%, which were considered flexible or deferred gift annuities. And why do I make that distinction? Well, if you get a donor to defer their payout for some period of time and allow that the assets, the corpus within that charitable gift annuity to grow for a period of time and compound, it significantly reduces the risk that annuity might be underwater later on down the road. And it also results in a higher remainder residuum benefit on average to the nonprofit at the end of the contract. So age, demographics, this is another important thing to consider. And this is one that makes sense, that the most represented cohort by age was 70 to 79. The average age of annuitants in this data is 78, 79. So it's kind of at the high end of that. A wider range would capture the cohorts of 60 to 69, 80 to 90, and then above 90, while bringing up the rear are the cohorts of 50 to 59 and less than 50. So you could clearly see the age driver behind the decision to enter into these annuity contracts.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is also interesting, something that, for our clients to think about, when they, with respect to their own programs, repeat donors accounted for more than half of new gift annuities. The average size for those repeat donors was similar to that 50,000. But what's interesting is on average, repeat donors go from 1 to 6 open annuities with organizations on average, with the same organization on average. If there's one missed opportunity here, Cynthia, it's that there's still an opportunity for educating donors more on gifting non-cash assets. The good news is that non-cash gifts make up almost 25%, and the QCDs that we talked about before now make up just over 20%, but you still have 55% out there that are gifting cash instead of these highly appreciated securities or taking advantage of the QCD like we talked about. So it's an opportunity for education, an opportunity for marketing, once again, to educate donors on that.
Right. And for bringing more value to the donors, more of what they want. It's important that they know what's possible. Tell us more about the remainder values of these annuities. Have you seen any trends in reporting on that?
Well, you may know that the ACGA is the Association of Charitable Gift Annuities is a body out there which sets industry standards both for payout rates and then target rates for the residuum. What we found in our data was that these annuities in our clients' programs were well above the 50% target, the ACGA target. In fact, the residuum of gifts that were terminated in 24 were over 90%. And these are for contracts whose average duration is about 18 to 19 years and whose payout rates were greater than 7%. So despite the length of these contracts, despite the payout rates, these programs are in good shape.
So by saying that the residue over 90%, that's over 90% of the original gift value? Is that what
yes.
Yeah. Okay. So if I put 100,000 in, I draw my annuity and it's invested, the investment programs are still delivering 90% of the original value to the charity at the end. That's awesome. And the donor got
well above.
Yeah.
And well above the 50% target.
Right. And the donor got the 7% annuity rate. So that's a win-win, isn't it?
Absolutely. And so what we see also, and I'll get back to this just because it's an important point, is especially when you think about sequence of returns in markets and some of that volatility, certainly we've seen enough of that over the last 5 years, that deferring those payouts for even as little as 3 years significantly improves the outcome of these charitable gift annuities and these program pools on the whole in the aggregate.
So that's another good option to be sure to discuss with the donors, is whether they really need the annuity to start paying right away, or whether it can, whether it's to their benefit and in their program to try to get more for the charity. So that's a good thing. Very good topic to discuss.
When we get questions sometimes about underwater gifts, what's the occurrence there? And 65% of our clients reported having underwater gifts, but only 3% of active annuities were underwater across all these organizations. So that to me says that while there may be underwater gifts in many places, it represents a very small portion of the overall pool, to where it doesn't put these pools at risk in any significant way.
Right. So the donor is guaranteed their annuity. If for some reason the principal value falls dramatically, maybe there's a stock market crash and the donor passes during that crash, so the principal there's not time for the principal to grow, then the charity gets less than what they intended, right? That's what you mean by underwater. But the annuitant is always going to get their percentage.
Exactly.
Right.
There's an obligation there.
Yeah. So from the institution's perspective, these well-run CGA programs in the aggregate looks like from the data, they're extremely safe from the organization's perspective.
Very safe, very successful.
Mm-hmm.
And it lends a lot of evidence and a lot of support to why organizations want to consider planned giving programs and marketing those and offering those to their donors.
Yeah. A little bit more on the donor profile. You mentioned the median age and that many of them are repeat donors. What other data can you gather about the donors from the report?
So here's the donor profile, or avatar, if you want to call it, that we created. Median age of 78 years old. They're repeat donors, as we talked about. They tend to be from populous states, California, Florida, New York, and they give in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, there you go.
That's giving season, right? October, November, December. And as I pointed out, quite a few of our clients are higher educational institutions, and that's where they're giving to in large part. And as we pointed out, keep in mind that $50,000 median cash gift amount and an average payout ratio over 7%, in fact, 7.6%.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's really super data. So let's wrap this up and talk about the key insights and strategies that all this data leads us to.
Yeah, some of them we've already covered as they relate to average gift size, median gift size, age or demographics of the donors. I think, just more importantly, maybe than the key insights, are what some of the strategy recommendations might be in and around that data. So one, it's important to maintain contact and initiate contact with prospective donors, educating them on things like the QC, the qualified charitable distribution, and using that to fund a gift annuity with your organization, educating clients on tax and estate planning benefits of a charitable gift annuity, the importance of donating non-cash assets, the benefits of maybe deferring those payouts so you can create whole strategies around retirement income and various sources of income you might have. And, from a tax standpoint, what's the preferential withdrawal or distribution strategy around tax-free distribution from Roth IRAs, IRA distributions from traditional IRAs, and then supplementing that with gift annuities to supplement those various retirement income sources. And then lastly, just looking more on the macro level for these programs, just making sure that you've got policies, procedures, and controls in place to analyze the concentration risk in these portfolios, the impacts of longevity and the impacts of market returns as they relate to the pool itself.
Yeah, that's all this so important background work of managing an investment program. One other thing I gather from this, and the data shows they're giving in October, November, or December, but they're planning before that, right? So a well-run program is going to have all the outreach planned for a little earlier in the year, maybe. So, you start reaching out to your prior donors and say, hey, how about doing it again this year, a little bit earlier earlier in the year, and then reaching out to potential new donors. And the reason I'm sensitive to that is I see we're now coming up on the end of May, which to me always in my calendar means I'm starting to plan the end of the year. And I know fundraisers are doing the same thing. That all important holiday giving season is right around the corner again.
Exactly. Yeah, it's important to have an ongoing dialogue, and it's important to be proactive in reaching out to your potential donors and existing donors for those very reasons you're talking about. I mean, it's just human nature in some cases to wait until the last minute when things can become a crisis or a fire drill at year end. So much better to plan ahead for that.
Yeah, especially in a tough economy where fundraising professionals are a little bit anxious about year end. So let's shift to a closely related planning strategy for philanthropists, and that is the Charitable Remainder Trust. In a lot of ways, it's similar to a gift annuity, but they tend to be much larger. So tell us what the data shows about the CRTs in your study.
To speak to that exact point, these are for larger gift sizes. Some of the same attributes of this instrument are similar to the CGAs, but the medium gift size right off the bat is $100,000. So much larger than the charitable gift annuities. Similarly, the average donor age is 79, although what you see is this is an important distinction. With CGAs, it very much tends to be age-related, the decision to enter into one or more CGA contracts versus a charitable remainder trust, which is much more tied to a wealth event and the tax and estate planning associated with that. So whereas it was very concentrated in some of those age cohorts for the CGAs that we talked about previously, you see more of a wide dispersion across the different age cohorts for CRTs. They're long gift lengths. We talked about 18, 19 years for CGAs. The average and median gift length for CRTs is 23 years, because of the way they're structured, whether they're structured as what to be unit or annuity trusts. They tend to have, in both cases, pretty high remainder amounts, but that's certainly the case for the unit trust, the CRUTs versus the CRATs. Those are the main distinctions between the data sets between the CGAs and the CRTs. Similarly, we created a donor profile for the typical CRT within these programs that we're managing. Median age of 79 years old, also tend to be from that segment of people who are multiple donors to a single organization. In the case of the CRTs, they tend to be multiple life, meaning, the income beneficiaries being the first spouse and then the second spouse. Most oftentimes it's a CRUT. Most oftentimes they're giving to educational institutions, higher ed, universities and colleges. The average gift size is $240,000 across the board, and it's most often funded with these highly appreciated securities like we talked about before, and across the board an average payout rate of 5.72%.
So any strategy recommendations we want to alert the listeners to? What do we gather from the data for strategy?
Similar to the recommendations that we made for the CGAs, a lot of it revolves around education and marketing. One key distinction is that firsthand the complexity of a CRT is much higher than a charitable gift annuity. It's important for our nonprofit clients to make sure they have the in-house expertise, the in-house resources to educate clients on these vehicles. And then secondly, to have the capability to accept what we'll call more complex gifts as well, gifts of real estate or other complex non-cash assets, because that's oftentimes, what are used in conjunction with funding these vehicles. Again, some education in and around the benefits from tax and estate planning. Oftentimes, as I mentioned, this is associated with a wealth event For instance, the sale of a business, some type of merger and acquisition, or a company going public. And then lastly, a very important consideration, as you well know with CRTs, is education about fiduciary roles and responsibilities, since it's a trust vehicle, and just making sure that potential donors understand the weights of that and the importance of that.
Absolutely. With our remaining few minutes here, let's touch on the BNY Charitable Gift Fund and the key insights and data that you were able to gather about the operations of your DAFs. Anything interesting? Well, I know there's something interesting there. Where do you want to start with the interesting tidbits in the DAF analysis?
I'll say even before we get into the specific data for 2024, there's a lot of debate out there about DAFs and how much money stays held within these versus distributed out to the community. And there's some industry statistics that show there's a 20% distribution rate from most DAFs. Ours has been well above that, which is great to see that our clients use it as a vehicle to get money back out into the community. We saw it spike over 50% during COVID, with COVID being the catalyst for our clients wanting to get money out now to the community in greater amounts. The great news is we saw the total dollar amount of gifts made to the DAFs increase year over year, and the total number of grants made from the Charitable Gift Fund also increase year over year. Good news, at least about the education of our clients. 92% of the gifts made to the Charitable Gift Fund were made using non-cash assets. So, we are educating our clients on the benefits of using highly appreciated securities and non-cash assets. What's interesting also, though, is that cash gifts made to the DAF were almost 9 times larger than non-cash gifts. I don't really know how to interpret that data, but that's what was borne out by the data. If you look at where that money went to, number one was social service organizations. They received the most grants, and that's consistent with the data looking back to both 2023 and the year prior to 2022. Social services organizations were closely followed by, again, educational institutions, which keep popping up, faith-based organizations, healthcare organizations, and then lastly, cultural organizations as well.
How about the donor profile?
Here's where there's some differences. So median age of the donor, 67 years old. So you can see considerably younger. Most funded with securities. Most gave in December. So we talked about the propensity to give in the fourth quarter, and that being very much hockey stick shaped. Some of it's in response to a wealth event, with the importance that donation had to be made before year end on 12/31, and some better idea of how much to donate or to gift to the DAF to optimize taxes. And the average grant was about $15,000, whereas the average contribution was about $53,000.
Interesting. So those are pretty sizable average grants coming out too. People are using the DAFs to make some nice sized gifts. Let's wrap up the DAF discussion with strategy recommendations for the institutions, the nonprofits, and then we'll kind of wrap up with some parting words of wisdom.
I always like to tell people with DAFs, it's important that you meet donors where they are. DAFs are becoming increasingly popular, just given the simplicity of utilizing DAFs. It's just a lot more simple, a lot less expensive than some of the other alternatives. And it's important to be talking about your donors and potential donors about DAFs, because if you're not, somebody else is.
That's absolutely right. Yeah.
And then I think there's a whole, again, marketing strategy that nonprofits can utilize to highlight the impact of grants from DAFs. So just not talking about CGAs or CRTs, but also saying, hey, if you have a DAF, we'll take those grants also.
That's right. That's right.
So, one thing we hear oftentimes from nonprofits is they feel like they don't know their donors. They want more data and more data. And one of the great things about working with potential donors that utilize DAFs, you see and they share with you where they're making their grants. So oftentimes you can tie that in with your own conversations and discussions and marketing strategies with existing and potential donors. And then lastly, DAFs, as you know, are a great way to engage the next generation in stewardship conversations. So if I have a DAF, I could create DAFs for my kids and fund those and help them learn about philanthropy. I can also nominate somebody as a successor advisor and involve family in that manner as well. So it's just a great way, I think, to create some continuity across generations. And that's important for nonprofit organizations as well.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. And I love using these insights to think about the donor relations strategy for the rest of this year, because the conversations with the major donors, touching on all these vehicles for making a difference is just a really important service from the fundraising professionals. So I love it. This is just all such great information. So any parting words of wisdom? Yeah. What did we miss? What was the coolest thing that you want to leave us with?
I think we covered everything in terms of what might be helpful to nonprofits, specific to CGAs, CRTs, donor advised funds. We talked about a kind of an avatar or a donor profile, and then also some strategy recommendations to consider to take back to your organization. One final point I would make is everything we just talked about is relevant not only to executive leaders at nonprofits, but to board leaders alike.
Oh, good point.
This call and this data is as relevant to them as it might be to the nonprofits themselves.
That's a really good point. Everybody on the team at the nonprofit needs to have at least a basic understanding of all these wonderful tools, because they are just really, really important. So, David, we're going to put a link to this in the show notes, right? I think we can get the report out there so that if anybody wants to really get into the details, they'll have it there.
Yep. More than happy to share that report, share it with everybody in the show notes.
Wonderful. All right. So thanks for joining me, David. This is so interesting. I can't wait to get my hands on the report and really dive into it myself.
Thank you for having me, Cynthia.
Oh, I'm so glad you could join me. So with that, we'll wrap up this episode. I'm Cynthia Rowland, and you've been listening to EO Radio Show, your nonprofit legal resource, brought to you by the Exempt Organizations Group at Farella, Braun & Martel. If you have suggestions for topics you would like for us to discuss, please email us at eoradioshow@fbm.com. That's eoradioshow@fbm.com. Thank you for joining us. Until next time, make a difference.